Hello everyone, this is Bob and Threadbare, and welcome back to Threadbare Reviews. I got an interesting one for you today, because patron A Great Divorce wants me to look at a film called Rubber, about a psychic car tire. It's an independent film that first came out in the year 2010. The story about the story. Not too much to say here. While the film Rubber was produced and released in the English language, it was actually a French production from the company Realistism Films, and the writer-director Quentin Dupieux. Dupieux is perhaps better known as Mr. Oiseau, which is his stage name as a European dance beat producer, but he's also written and directed films, starting with music videos in 1997. Rubber would be Dupieux's third feature-length film, but his first attempt at an absurdist horror comedy. And while that sounds like an odd string of words, let me just say that absurdism and surrealism both have very strong legacies in France, and French comedies in general are much more likely to be absurd than, say, British or American comedies. But that being said, Rubber is also following in the American B-movie horror tradition of having something random come to life and start killing people. The real difference is that Rubber got released for the Cannes Film Festival, and got a generally positive reception. Actually, while the film has more positive than negative reviews, that's not a complete picture. Rubber was apparently a very polarizing film, and while no one thought the film was cinematic gold, they either loved it for what it was, or hated it for being pretentious and yet stupid. So, which side will I fall on? Let's find out. The review. A discarded tire in a desert dump comes to life, starts to identify the things around it, and then awakens its psychokinetic powers to blow up cans, animals, and eventually human heads. When it comes to a road, it sees a woman it doesn't want to blow up and follows her to a motel, and meanwhile a group of spectators are watching the story unfold in real time. The film crew poisons the spectators on the director's orders so that they can end the film early, but one of them, a grizzled old veteran, refuses to eat the poisoned turkey, and so the cast are forced to continue the movie. The local sheriff's department tries to stop the tire unsuccessfully, and after it sees a tire fire, it becomes enraged and massacres the local town. The sheriff and the woman that the tire stalked work together to try and blow it up with a decoy, but when they take too long, the surviving spectator rolls in and tells them to hurry things along. So the sheriff, annoyed, stomps into the tire's hiding spot and shoots it with his shotgun, but then the tire reincarnates into an old tricycle and blows up that last spectator. It then gathers an army of other discarded tires and marches on Hollywood. The end. I can't really say I loved or hated this film. There were some parts I liked and some parts I didn't. The acting was adequate, no standout performances, but it did what it needed to do. The moving tire was done with practical effects, which I appreciated, but it was also pretty obvious that they hid the machinery they needed to use under a black cloth. The soundtrack was good, pretty much had to be since it carries the film in several spots. When the main character has no voice and no expressions, you need a good soundtrack to set the proper mood. Otherwise all you've got are a bunch of silent shots of a tire rolling through the desert. Apparently, Dupieux, along with a fellow electronic musician, wrote the soundtrack himself, so it's not too surprising that it's one of the best parts of the film. I also like the cinematography, which makes good use of the vast desert landscapes just outside Los Angeles. Something else I liked was the metatextual elements of having the audience be a part of the film, at first just watching, but eventually intervening and changing the flow of the story. There's also a whole bit just after they kill the spectators where the sheriff tries to wrap things up early, but he's the only one there who seems to be aware that this is a film. And even though the whole scene doesn't really make sense, it's honestly my favorite scene in the movie. What I didn't like about this aspect was the surface-level understanding of absurdism that the film portrays, but I'll save that part for the analysis. The one other moment I'd like to highlight is the part where someone accidentally eats some poisoned food and dies slowly and painfully while begging for his life, with every last second of it happening on camera while the man is sitting next to him and ignoring him completely. It is by far the most disturbing death in the film, and it's the example that I plan on using in the future when describing the French sense of humor. In the end, Rubber is not a film for everyone. However, it does enough interesting things that I'd recommend watching it. If nothing else, it can be a great source of new ideas. The analysis. At its heart, absurdism is the acknowledgement of how foolish and absurd it is for humans to search for meaning in places where there is none. Why do good people die and bad people live? Why do we set rules for society but then break them all the time? Why is there something instead of nothing? Why do we care so much what the answers to these questions are, when the answers don't really change anything? That's absurdism in a nutshell, and you do get a decent understanding of it from watching Rubber. My complaint is that the examples that the film uses for questions without answers are questions that have answers. Why is the alien in Spielberg's E.T. brown? Because Spielberg wanted to design an alien that was monstrous yet relatable, and so he and his special effects team made E.T.'s skin the color and consistency of old leather. It's not quite like human skin, but it's close. Why can we not see the air? Because visible light moves through the air more easily than other frequencies, and so our eyes are designed to capture and process visible light as a way to efficiently sense our surroundings. These questions are asked at the beginning and the end of the film, and in the middle there's a part where the sheriff, the guy who presents the questions, makes an illegal move in chess and asks why he can't make that move. Well, it's because you and your opponent have agreed to play chess, and if you cheat, then you aren't playing chess. What you're doing is wasting everyone's time. You could argue that chess is also a waste of time, but the reason games are fun is because winning feels better when there's a real risk of losing. So that's what I mean when I say the film has a surface-level understanding of absurdism. But what I'm not quite sure about is whether this is because Dupieux doesn't fully understand absurdism, or because the film is an absurdist parable. The characters rather deliberately avoid asking the big questions I listed at the start of this segment, and yet the plot of the film itself seems to ask all of them by implication. It also asks a question about itself. Why are you watching a terrible low-budget B-movie? What are you hoping to get out of this experience of watching a tire murder people? These questions aren't fully absurd because you can find factual answers if you think about them hard enough, but those answers can lead you to new questions, and eventually, you might just discover the true absurdity of life. And maybe all Rubber wants to do is get you started on that journey. Thanks for joining me again for today's Threadbare review, and I hope I'll see you next time. Until then, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and if you have a little extra money to spare, you can support me on Patreon. Link in the description.